Mara had one rule for mornings: move fast, speak little, avoid attention. The cafe on Winter Lane was perfect for that, quiet, predictable, filled with people too busy with their own routines to ask questions. Most days, she slipped in and out unnoticed, like a shadow passing through someone else's life. But that morning, the universe disagreed. Cold air followed her inside. The sound of the doorbell sliced through the chatter. A few heads looked up, too many. And then his eyes caught hers. Evan Callan. Black jacket. Hands wrapped around a half-finished cup. A single father who carried himself like someone who'd been forced to grow up twice, once for himself, once for his daughter Sophie. His wife's death had carved something silent and heavy in him. People in town said he hadn't laughed in a long time, that grief had settled into his bones. But when he saw Mara step inside, something in him shifted, quick, quiet, but real. Recognition? Empathy? A kind of alertness that only shows up when a wounded person notices another wounded person. She felt it immediately. He wasn't staring at her scars, he was staring at her pain. That made her more nervous. Mara kept her head down and joined the line. The whispers started earlier than usual. A couple at the counter lowered their voices too obviously. Someone else shifted sideways, pretending to reach for sugar but really just avoiding standing too close. Her burned cheek pulsed, not physically, but in that phantom way trauma remembers. She told herself she didn't care. She told herself she was used to this. But lies have a short shelf life. The cafe windows fogged from the steam machines. Her reflection in the glass was distorted, ironically kinder than the real thing. Half her face was still smooth, still recognizable from before the fire. The other half, she'd stopped describing it years ago. People looked away fast, but the flinch was always there. The subtle recoil. The polite horror. 3 years, and it still bruised her. She got her coffee, stepped aside, and collided with someone. The cup jolted. Coffee splashed onto a dark coat. Her chest seized. "Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean." The words died when she saw who the coat belonged to. Evan. He wasn't annoyed. He wasn't startled. He wasn't doing that performative smile people gave her when they were trying not to stare at her scars. Instead, he gently took the cup from her trembling hands. "It's all right," he said. Not soft. Not pitying. Just calm. Honest. For one dangerous second, she believed him. His eyes weren't full of shock or discomfort, just concern. A grounded kind. A quiet kind. The kind that could disarm someone who'd spent years bracing for impact. And that terrified her more than anything. She stepped back instantly, muttered a breathless apology, and made a beeline for the exit. Her instincts were survival instincts: run. Stay unnoticeable. Don't give anyone the chance to hurt you. But she didn't make it far. Because someone else had noticed. At a window seat sat Sophie, 8 years old, wearing a bright scarf and swinging her short legs under the table. She had her mother's curls and her father's eyes. She saw the whole thing. Her expression wasn't cruel or curious. It was something far harder to handle: inquisitive kindness. "Dad," she whispered loudly enough for Mara to hear. Why were they all looking at her like that? Mara stiffened. Evan didn't answer right away. His jaw tightened a little. Not anger, just that exhausted frustration good people feel when they see something wrong and can't undo it. He looked over at Mara as she reached the door, snow dusting her shoulders. She wasn't walking away from the cafe. She was escaping it. Evan hated the look on her face, the combination of humiliation and experience. He'd seen something like it in his daughter's eyes on the nights she asked why her mother wasn't coming back. Different story. Same emptiness. He stood up. Something in him moved before he consciously decided to move it. "Wait." The room quieted. The word froze Mara mid-step. She turned slowly, holding the cup like a shield. Her heartbeat was loud enough she swore others could hear it. Evan took a few steps toward her, hands visible, movements deliberate, approaching someone who looked like she'd bolt at the slightest nudge. The cafe chatter dimmed, replaced with the heavy curiosity of people who loved a spectacle more than kindness. "Don't leave," Evan said. Not a command. Not a plea. Just the truth of someone who regretted letting a moment slip. Her throat tightened. "Do I know you?" "No," his voice steadied. "But maybe you should." She didn't know what to do with that. People didn't talk to her like that. People avoided her, tolerated her, or pitied her. But this? This was too direct, too human. Her gaze flicked to Sophie. The little girl gave her a soft smile, not pitying, not hesitant, just welcoming. A child's instinct, unpolluted by judgment. Something cracked inside Mara. A small crack, but enough. Against every instinct screaming at her to run, she stayed. Evan gestured toward the table. "Let me get you a new coffee. On the house. Or on me. Either way." She hesitated. Her hands were trembling again. She hated that people could see that. She hated being visible at all. But she nodded. Because for the first time in years, someone wasn't treating her like a tragedy. The right stranger doesn't need years to understand you, just one honest moment. They sat. Evan ordered a fresh cup for her. Sophie watched with innocent curiosity, sipping from her chocolate milk. The cafe buzz returned, but softer now, like people weren't sure whether to pretend they weren't eavesdropping. So, Evan began, "What's your name?" "Mara," she said. Her voice wavered. She cursed herself for it. "I'm Evan. That's Sophie." Sophie waved enthusiastically. Mara returned the tiniest wave back. Evan didn't ask about her scars immediately. He didn't dance around the topic either. He asked about small things, how long she'd been in town, whether she liked the cold, what brought her to the cafe so early. Simple questions from someone trying to understand her, not dissect her. She surprised herself by answering. Not fully. Not emotionally. But enough. Eventually, he asked, gently, what brought her here? That question held weight. Real weight. She swallowed. Her fingers traced the rim of the cup. I needed a new start. He didn't push. Didn't fill the silence with assumptions. Just waited. Something about that patience made the truth spill out in pieces. She told him about the fire. The unbearable heat. The loss. Her parents' screams she still heard sometimes in her sleep. The hospital. The therapy. The stares. The pity. The job interviews she lost the moment she walked through the door. She expected him to flinch halfway through. He didn't. He listened the way people listen to things they know they can't fix but refuse to look away from. When she finished, she stared down at her hands, ashamed of how much she'd revealed. People don't usually stay when I talk about it, she whispered. I'm not most people, he replied. This time, she looked up. And he meant it. Sophie leaned forward and placed a small cookie in front of her. Mom said cookies help sad hearts, she murmured, shy but sincere. Mara didn't know whether to cry or laugh. What came out instead was a tiny smile, the first real one she'd made in years. It startled her more than the coffee spill. Hours passed without her noticing. She talked. Evan shared stories about Sophie. Sophie proudly showed Mara a drawing of a crooked snowman. Time slipped in a way it hadn't for her in a long time. By the time she stood to leave, the fear in her chest had loosened enough for her to breathe without pain. I should let you both get back to your morning, she said. Evan nodded but didn't hide the slight disappointment in his eyes. Come again sometime? Sophie chimed in before Mara could answer. Please? Mara swallowed. Maybe, she whispered. It wasn't a promise. But it wasn't a refusal either. She stepped outside. Snowflakes settled on her coat. She breathed in the cold air and realized something unsettling. She felt seen. And not in the way that hurt. In the way that reminded her she was still alive. Mara didn't plan on returning to the cafe the next day, but routine has a way of betraying you when something meaningful interrupts it. She tried convincing herself that yesterday didn't matter, that Evan's kindness was just another rare anomaly in an otherwise predictable life. But the truth lodged deeper than she wanted to admit. She caught herself replaying his voice, his patience, Sophie's small gesture with the cookie. She told herself it was nothing, but nothing doesn't usually echo this loudly. By mid-morning, she found herself walking toward Winter Lane, not because she wanted coffee, but because she couldn't ignore the pull she felt, an unsettling, confusing pull toward being seen without flinching. When she entered, Evan wasn't there. Neither was Sophie. The absence hit harder than she expected, annoyingly so. She ordered her drink and sat by the window, irritated at herself for caring. 15 minutes passed before the bell above the door chimed and Evan walked in carrying Sophie's backpack. His eyes landed on her instantly, like he'd been scanning the room for her before he even entered. He gave a small, unguarded nod, the kind people give when they're relieved without saying it out loud. Sophie ran to Mara's table and plopped down across from her with the ease of someone who'd already decided they were friends. That simple assumption disarmed Mara more than any adult interaction ever had. Over the next weeks, small moments built into something steadier, a habit of meeting at the cafe, walking Sophie to school together sometimes, even helping Evan tune the old piano she eventually played again. Evan never treated her scars like fragile glass. He never pretended they weren't there either. He simply talked to her like the past didn't erase her present. And that steadiness was the very thing that began to break through her defenses. But kindness always draws attention, especially in a town addicted to gossip. Rumors spread fast. Whispers about the burned woman, spending too much time with the widowed father, speculation about whether she was clinging to him out of desperation or he was clinging to her out of loneliness. The ugliness didn't surprise Mara. People had always been more ruthless behind closed lips than open confrontation. What surprised her was how loudly it echoed in her mind when she overheard two mothers at the cafe chuckling that she was collecting sympathy from a grieving widower. The words stabbed deeper than she wanted to admit. That night she ignored Evan's texts. The next day she skipped the cafe entirely. By the third day, Evan showed up at her apartment door. The snow outside thickened, the cold sharp against his face, but he stood there until she finally opened the door. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her voice was barely steady as she said, "You shouldn't be here. People are talking. I don't want Sophie hurt because of me." He stepped inside without waiting for permission, not forcefully, but with the quiet certainty of someone refusing to let fear win. "Mara," he said, "people will always talk. They talked when my wife died. They talked when I struggled to raise Sophie. They talked when I went back to work too early, and when I waited too long. People survive off noise because they can't handle silence. But Sophie and I, we see you. Not the scars. You." She tried to argue, but the words collapsed under the weight of everything she'd been holding alone. Tears spilled down her face as she whispered, "You don't know what it's like to be stared at like you're broken." He reached out and held her hand, the one with faint burn marks that she always instinctively hid. "You're not broken," he said. "You survived something that would have destroyed most people. Strength leaves marks, too." Something in her chest cracked open, not painfully, but like a locked door finally giving way. For the first time since the fire, she didn't pull away when someone held her hand. After that night, something between them shifted. Not dramatically. Not romantically. Just honestly. The cafe slowly became a place of healing instead of humiliation. With encouragement from Evan and pure insistence from Sophie, Mara agreed to play the piano at a small charity event organized to raise funds for burn victims. The suggestion scared her more than the fire itself, but the idea also sparked something she thought she'd lost: purpose. When the night arrived, the cafe was packed, too packed for her comfort, but she forced herself to breathe. The same people who once whispered behind her back now watched with quiet anticipation, some even looking ashamed of how they'd treated her. She sat at the piano, fingers trembling, heart pounding, but she pressed the first key anyway. The music flowed out, not delicate or perfect, but raw, carrying pain, survival, and the stubbornness it takes to keep living when life keeps taking. Each note was a confession, and the room listened like they finally understood the gravity of what she had endured. When the final note faded, silence hung in the air, heavy, reverent. Then applause erupted, loud enough to make her chest tighten. It wasn't pity. It wasn't politeness. It was respect. Evan stood beside her, fingers intertwined with hers, grounding her in the moment she never thought she'd have. "See," he whispered. "They see you now, the real you." And for once, she didn't argue. She didn't deny it. She believed him. And belief was something she hadn't allowed herself in years. The applause washed over her like a tide, and for the first time since the fire, she felt something close to whole, not because someone validated her, but because she finally stopped hiding from her own reflection. Behind the lights, Sophie beamed with pride, holding a cookie in her small hand like a symbol of the first day they met. Mara smiled, unguarded, unashamed, real. Healing hadn't come from silence or hiding. It had come from the one thing she spent years avoiding: being seen. And this time, she wasn't running away.